Welcome back to Alabama Gristmill. This is one of your hosts, Mike, and with my co-host, Donna Causey.
Hi, I'm glad to be here, as always.
Good to be back this week and just talking about Alabama history.
Right.
We've got some a story today. We're talking about one of my favorite towns is Auburn, Alabama.
Not mine, but yours.
And it's a town that was almost named Geneva, and we'll find out why it was named Auburn instead of Geneva in the podcast. And the town also, saw the notes, it's kind of interesting, was found named by Elizabeth Taylor. So we'll kind of delve more into that and find out that information. So one thing we wanted to mention as well is this weekend there's the Auburn City Fest that it'll be going on free downtown on Saturday. So we'll tell you more about that as we get into the story and everything. So how are things going with you?
They're going super. I'm enjoying the weather like it always. You know, it's spring, so that's nice. Spring now. I don't know when people listen to this, but it's spring now when we're doing this, and I can enjoy it anyway.
Absolutely, and like I've been saying, or we've been saying the past few podcasts, is so we're really just enjoying and I'm pretty amazed by the new listeners coming in, and it's just been surprising.
Yes.
I like to see all the people excited about history in Alabama. If you hadn't heard about it, this week we started up the Patreon program. I guess it's been 2 weeks now.
Yeah.
Where you can, if you want to become a member of our community, Alabama Pioneers community, you can join in with the Patreon program where you basically subscribe, or actually do just a one-time donation as well if you want to. You can go find that on the webpage. There's a big button that says "Be a Patron," and we'll see we've got a lot of we've got some rewards for that, and then and some goals. And one of our goals that we're coming up close on for the first 100 patrons, we're going to be giving away. Once we reach that goal of 100 patrons, we're going to be giving away one of your popular ebooks.
Yes, it's actually one of the most popular ones because it gets people started in family research if they want to do it. I mean, they get ideas how to do it. Where do I start? Hints and tips for beginning genealogists and online resources. There's also 81 questions in there that are wonderful to ask any older relatives before they die, so you'll be able to get that history. I discovered something. We're working with this Patreon program, and I'm learning more as I go, all the things that we can do with it. And one thing that I think will be a lot of benefit to a lot of people is people that belong, the members of the community that join, can ask questions of each other and post pictures of you. If you got a picture, you don't know who it is, you might can post a picture up and ask if anybody knows. We're developing a community basically through it, so you can help and support each other and maybe answer some questions about your family history that you didn't know. The more members we have, the more questions we can have answered as a community.
And you'd like to always give a random shout out to a couple of our newest members, or one is John Peoples, and a few others. There would be Frederick Takan. I hope I'm saying that right. So those are some of our latest ones we'd like to give a shout out to, and the many others that have donated and become a member of the Alabama Pioneers community.
That's right. That said, keeps us all going.
Keeps us all going. Yeah, just pretty much we're doing this as a labor of love, and it's a lot of expenses involved in doing a podcast, website, keeping up with Facebook, all the other things, creating videos, and
it's turning out to be a better way for me. When you have so many, we were on so many social media things that it's hard for me to keep up and respond and get back with people. And I'm finding this program is much easier to use, and it's kind of makes it a closed community more than anything else, rather than going all over to the world to people that really aren't interested in what we're doing.
And that's great. And we just really appreciate all the people that have signed up, and let your friends know that are interested in history that we've got a fun thing going on here, and love for them to join, and just check it all out. And like I said, you can go to the alabamapioneers.com webpage. There's a big button that says Become a Patron. And that'll take you to the patron page where you can get all the information and choose the levels that you want to be supporting or subscribing to. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get on into the actual story here.
Yeah, it's a very interesting story. Auburn has a whole lot of stories. I know it's not my favorite subject, It is yours. But when I was fascinated by all the history related to the town and the county and all, and just had to share it, especially with the City Fest coming up this weekend. The City Fest is being, the theme, I think, is on Native Americans, so there's probably going to be a lot of that going on. Lee County was part of the Big Creek community in the lower Alabama that was involved a lot within the Creek War, so there's a lot of history to go by.
Yes, a lot of the towns in the area around Alabama are towns, and there's the Chewacla State Park, Lochapoka, and Opelika are all around there. I guess that came from the Native American history.
Oh, they did. And we're not going to get into that so much today. It's just kind of the start of the Auburn, but there's more on the website if people want to know about the Native American. And go to the City Fest, because I'm sure you're going to learn a lot there. But in the fall of 1836 is when Auburn kind of was starting, because he later became a judge. Judge John H. Harper and his son came by horseback from Harris County, Georgia, in search of better land. Everybody was looking for better land, because after a while, after a few plantings, the land began to wear out, so they kept searching more and more for it. And on the way, they spent the night in Jones County, Georgia, at the home of a Mr. Taylor. Lo and behold, Taylor's daughter, who was almost 15 and a rare beauty, was home from Wesleyan College at the time. And the son of John Harper, Tom Harper, was just struck by her beauty and charm. He just, couldn't get enough of being with her and around her. And they couldn't stay very long, and they left and continued on their journey to southeast Alabama, where they heard that there was better land. Judge Harper was probably pretty charming, because he talked to the Creek Indians, and he made a treaty with them and traded for the land. And the Lochapoka area and the Notasulga,
that's right, Notasulga.
I'm getting all twisted up in my mouth today, Jay. And Tuskegee were the areas of the land he bought. He went back and got a civil engineer named Simeon Perry, and he laid out the town. There's more story of Simeon Perry, too, we'll get on down the line on that. Harper then gave the town the Methodist and Baptist church lots. He was very generous. And he also gave a lot for a female college. And you kind of wonder why a female college rather than a male college. But you got to remember, a lot of people were sending their sons off back east to college, so they didn't have to worry about that a whole lot. There was a place for them to go, but many times the girls didn't have a place. So a lot of those were started, in the local area. Well, the female college was started where the Kappa Sigma house was built at a later date. And he also gave the lot for Pine Hill Cemetery. A slave was the first one buried in the cemetery, and he was owned by Judge Harper. After the town was surveyed by Simeon Perry, the people began to hear about it, and they got all excited and came from other areas, because he was talking about how great the land was. And most of them came from North and South Carolina and Georgia, because it was nearby. And you usually talk about it among your friends, I guess, and so whole communities would leave and head for the town of Auburn. But at that time, it wasn't called Auburn. They didn't have a name. So a name was suggested by Mrs. Freeman that they ought to call it Geneva, but it wasn't really getting a real good response. And so they just kind of let it lay for a little while. The Harpers were going back and forth to the town from Georgia and stopping at the Taylors on the way for young Tom Harper to get to see Miss Taylor if he could. One day he was asking her, does she have any name for their new town? And just off the cuff, I guess. And she happened to be reading Goldsmith's Deserted Village at the time, and she quoted the line, "Auburn, sweet Auburn, loveliest village of the plain." That kind of stuck in their mind, and they started thinking, Auburn, that's a good name for the town. And so they kind of drew straws on it, the story goes. The town did, and between Geneva and Auburn won. That's how Elizabeth Taylor named the town of Auburn. It wasn't quite Elizabeth Taylor we probably think about today, but that's how the name started. And Tom Harper and Lizzie wound up getting married in 1837, and they lived in the first frame house that was erected in the city of Auburn. Their home stood where the Thomas Hotel was later established, and the area became kind of a tavern so they could pay for people who stopped off on the way. The couple had 2 sons named Swep and Jack, and Tom died just a few years later after they were born of consumption. So Miss Harper married again to Judge Flanagan, and who happened to be a teacher at the time. They say that she was such a beautiful lady that even late in her life, she lived a long life, but they say she was beautiful even at the end. And then there's another wonderful story that goes along with Auburn about grandchildren finding coins on an old plantation. There was earlier, even before 1836, Widow Wimberly was living on some land that she owned and with 1,000 slaves. And Simeon Perry, who laid out the town, became her overseer, and he, must have charmed her. Too, a lot of charming men back then, and he wound up marrying her. So Simeon Perry and Widow Wimberly, lived in this huge plantation and were well-known, prominent people in the town. But sadly, their house caught fire one day, and she had been keeping her money bags in the closet. And, of course, her money bag got burned up, too. Money got scattered here, there, and yon from the burning of the fire. And they say that the grandchildren would often find coins in the spot where the house had burned. And in their second home, after the house burned, he built another one about 100 yards away from the original house of hand-hewed timber and pegged together on what later became East Drake Avenue. And it was called, for many years, it stood there for many, many years, it was called the Perry Coffin Home. And poor Widow Wimberly, she worked in the basement. She loved, I guess, to make material and craft. And so she worked in the basement with the loom. And I guess it was kind of damp and dark down there. And she contracted typhoid fever. And the sickness spread throughout the town. Poor Mr. Perry, he was so concerned about the whole situation because it had started at his house that he just tore the basement completely up and dismantled it. But and later owners were managed to restore it, though. But sadly, the house was destroyed in a tornado in 1953. It stood there all that time. And it also destroyed many homes in northern Alabama.
Well, how did all the universities and colleges started, or the education basis of Auburn start?
I mentioned before that it started with a female college, and it did in 1853. And the Freemasons were the ones that were instrumental in building the schools and colleges, many schools and colleges all over the state of Alabama. And they built the first female college in Auburn. Well, not built it because it had already started, but they started the first female college called the Masonic Female College in 1853, and it stood where the Kappa Sigma House later stood. So that area is a very early area in Auburn's history. There was a chapel that was on the campus of the female college, and it is where the tennis court was later built. So, but the chapel was saved. It kind of fell apart, so they had to rebuild it. But when they rebuilt it, they moved it to another lot, and they brick veneered it. And you know what the name of it is now?
No.
Langdon Hall.
Well, I know that.
You've heard of that building before?
Yeah, one of the oldest prominent buildings on campus.
Right. Well, it started even older than you think, back in 1853 from that chapel, because it's within that building, basically, because it's changed a lot from the chapel back then. And there was a professor who was the first president of that female college, who invented an apparatus back then, and it was in 1858, which is very, very early, called a miasmometer. And what it did, it checked the impurity of the air around people who were sick. And you got to remember, back then people used to think that the air was the danger, and it caused them to become sick. And so everybody was trying to invent something that would measure it, and so people could avoid those areas. And so that's what he did. And so he was well known for that. It got written up in science magazines and everything. And a number of Masons lived in the town, and they built a beautiful Masonic hall on the lot where Jolly's store later stood. And some of the prominent people that were Masons during the area was White and Drake, Johnson, Perry, Sanford, Reese, and Slayton. And you've probably heard some names that'll continue on in Alabama's history.
Well, Sanford Hall is the main admin building on campus.
The Masons were very involved in the early community of Auburn, as you can see. And the Masons were good in a lot of different areas all over the state in supporting schools and education. And they actually built a lot of the new academies in the area so they can get. A lot of times they would have their area in the top of a building and the school would be in the bottom. That happened over and over in different communities throughout Alabama. Major Slayton, who was a Royal Arch Mason, was an early resident, and he became principal of the Boys Academy, which later was started. And he later moved to Atlanta and became superintendent of all the public schools in Atlanta. There was another story about Major Slayton that was really interesting. He was a Royal Arch Mason, as I said before, and an early resident. He became principal of the Boys Academy, which was on the same lot where the grammar school stood. And a family of Lees moved into the area. They came from Georgia, but they originally came from Virginia. And their home and land was near where the veterinary hospital was later built. And Thomas Slayton married one of the Lee sisters, and whose name was Mrs. Sarah Jane Lee. And she was actually the first cousin of Robert E. Lee. So we really have a strong connection. Auburn has a strong connection to Robert E. Lee, too, because of that Lee family. The rest of the story, yeah. You can just go on and on with all these stories about Auburn. I mean, there's just not enough time to tell them all in this one podcast, but there's a lot of information that we've put on the website. Yeah,
as far as all these old buildings, I know there's, some of them aren't still standing in Auburn. What happened?
There was a tornado, a real severe tornado that came through in 1953, and a lot of those older parts of northern Auburn these homes were lost. And they stood for many, many years, but they were lost because of that. But luckily, in the 1930s, the Historic American Buildings Survey, which is the first federal preservation program, took some pictures of some of those homes, about 4 of them. Of course, there were many, many more, but it gives us an idea of what they look like. And like I said, we've taken some of those and put them on the website so you can see them there. But thank goodness they did that, or we'd have nothing to show from what happened, because tornadoes are bad in Alabama. You know that. We lose a lot of our historic structures because of that. And that's one reason we're thankful for cameras and photographs today, that people have saved and preserved. But they've got some beautiful pictures of what it looked like in the 1930s.
The biggest thing is, how did this all lead up to Auburn being founded?
Well, that's the big story. The East Alabama Male College is the beginning of Auburn. And the cornerstone was actually laid by the Masons in 1857. And they had a big to-do when they laid that cornerstone. It was the same ceremony as the Masons do today. So if you want to see a little bit of what it's like, go to a cornerstone laying. They still do those around the state from time to time. So you can ask about if they're having any coming up and go see one. It's a very interesting ceremony to watch. And
a lot of tradition tied up in that.
The White House in Washington, D.C., they laid the cornerstone there. And the thing about it is that ceremony has gone down from way back in those days, and it has very, very little changes in it. So you're really looking at history when you're watching them do that ceremony. And it's very, very formal. So it's fun. But you don't have to be formal, but when you go see it. But the people that are conducting it are very formal, is what I meant. The one at Auburn, though, or the East Alabama Male College, which was the beginning of Auburn, They had such a huge dinner. They said it was 1,200 feet of tables spread out with all the food you ever could want on it. They made a big to-do out of it. If you want to know more about that affair, that's another thing that's on the website. Auburn Female College is, believe it or not, was housed in what today is Auburn High School. And it was Auburn Female College existed between 1852 and 1885. Auburn High School is now the oldest public secondary school in Alabama. It was founded in 1837 and is the fifth oldest public high school in the American South. Can you believe that?
I didn't know that.
Auburn's got a lot of history that you didn't even know about. And there you stayed down all those years. The high school was moved. But it was not located on the ground. It's not today located on the original grounds. It was moved in 1965. But there's more and more stories that could go on. A lot of the history was written up by Mrs. Mary Reese Fraser. She luckily she wrote it down back. It's probably in the 30s or 40s, and really did a wonderful job. So if we didn't have that, that's why it's important to write all this down today. Time goes by quickly before you know it, and no one remembers what happened. And if we don't rely on these actual accounts of what life was like when people were living during those eras, we don't have the information.
That's true. That's
why we're trying to keep this going.
That's some great history for the early days of pre-Auburn days, and then
that's just
early days
touching
of Auburn.
on it. That's just a light touch on it too, because there's many, many, many stories about it, for where Auburn came from and the people, the Methodists involved in Glenville, and you find a lot of it on the website. So just go there. You can just search it through the name, put in the search word Auburn.
I'm just going to have fun telling all my friends that Elizabeth Taylor named Auburn.
Yeah, she did. I enjoyed that one. It kind of throws you a minute that, wait a minute, that's not quite right. I don't think that's quite
right?
true.
It is. It kind of is right, but it's not what you're thinking.
Your mind immediately jumps to today's Elizabeth Taylor, and you wonder how in the world, So anyway, that's funny. When I read that. I enjoyed that.
That's a good little trivia
too.
piece. Well,
right.
Like we said, there's the Auburn City Festival this weekend, and that's their largest free festival downtown. So there's a lot of activities with family stuff, family entertainment. You've got I know I'm looking on their site, which is the AuburnCityFest.com, where you can find out all the information. But they have the Medicine Tail Singers, going to be some Native American performance, and powwows and celebrations, showing off their powwows and different cultural celebrations. That there's going to be some frisbee dogs, which you always like, clowns and jugglers, pony rides, the whole thing. So if you get a chance, get down there and now know a little bit of history about the area.
Yeah, go look at some of these sites and think about what was there before 1953 when a lot got destroyed. But
yes,
sadly,
it's definitely changing now. And I'm glad they called it Auburn and not Geneva. I don't think I could understand. Geneva University, Geneva University football.
Yeah,
that's
Geneva's
not
a nice
right.
name. It's a pretty name, but you just got so much connected with it now.
That's what it is.
I think that anything else would just not work.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. This episode up. As I always say, if you got some friends that are into history or like to hear a little bit about Alabama that they might not have known about, kind of let them know about the podcast, and that'd be great. And
certainly, we'd appreciate you sharing it with others.
Absolutely. Share, and then you can find us on all the different podcast platforms, YouTube, Spotify, and even on the webpage.
If you go to the City Fest and learn something new, share it with us. I'm sure you'll have a whole lot more information about the Native Americans. Like I say, this is just a touch of what is the history around that area. So
yeah, because
share your stories.
We did that one on Marion at the City Fest, and we had somebody post on that one What were they saying?
Douglas Whiteville reminding us of Nicola Marchot, who was a famous artist who lived there, and I didn't mention him in the story. And also, he used to ride around and notice the home of where Sam Houston and Margaret Lee got married, and it had been run down for so many years, and it was sadly broken into. But now it has been restored, so that's good news.
That's very good news. Good to see somebody saving that history.
Saving that history. It's hard to do.
But just
now people can be proud of it.
And comment, if you make comments and add anything to the stories that we can't cover it all, and Lord knows we don't know it all.
That's the truth. I wish I did, and I make mistakes. I make mistakes too. Because, some of these stories are old, and people get opinionated. They write what they want to write, and it may not be totally true. So if you've got an opposite viewpoint, let us know.
Yep, that's the whole point of it being a living history. Kind of, we want to be able to go with what the actual stories are, and the people that have been there, so get the good stories out there. But
exactly, and sometimes it's not written correctly from stories in the past. I've run into one recently that it was talking about the largest farm in the country was in Alabama, but they were just saying that the article came from Toronto from way back in 1910, and they made the mistake and said that Birmingham, a little south of Birmingham, is the town of Tuskegee. That's what it was, Tuskegee, which is not true.
Well, it is relative to how far they're away. It is
and I guess in Toronto, distances are different. Everybody remarked, that's not quite right, but
it's a lot closer. Yeah,
people report
speaking.
Things kind of a little differently. That's what I'm saying. So when we get enough reports coming from everywhere, we'll get the true story. That's what I'm trying to do.
There you go.
Let's look back. I'm trying to put these articles out, and then other people can add to it, and we'll get the true story.
Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up, and of course, share the podcast to your friends and family that are interested in the history of Alabama. And we'll go ahead and until next time, we'll let Red Foley play us out with the Alabama Jubilee. I should put on the War Eagle song.
You ought to. You can say that.
It might be the War Eagle. It might be War Eagle here. All right. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.